Howdy folks, we're talking about sports games on the Genesis and Super Nintendo. Which console had the better sports games? Last time we left off in 1993 and I proclaimed that both systems had plenty of good sports games for every kind of a sport and that it wasn't really clear which one had won by then. Of course, the Genesis had better Electronic Arts sports games in 1991 and 1992, especially when it came to hockey and football. But by late 1993, it was pretty much even. Check the previous video for details. This video, we're going to be looking into 1994 and further years and find out who actually won the console war when it comes to the sports games. 1994, Nintendo released Ken Griffey Presents Major League Baseball, which was a very fun baseball game, not too bent on realism, but there were fun things to do like the home run derby and a lot of nice animation and played very well. So that really helped Nintendo and the baseball department. But what also helped was Hardball 3, previously released on the Genesis and PC, and this gave the Super Nintendo a realistic baseball game to enjoy. The Genesis, though, received World Series Baseball, which was also quite fun to play, but mostly extremely realistic. I mean, it had fantastic graphics, and it had that sports talk commentary. So, yeah, it wasn't really clear which system had the better baseball game. I feel like Ken Griffey Jr. has aged better because, well, it's just a lot of fun to play, and it's nice. But World Series Baseball, I have to admit, looks really good. It's a nice product, and I can understand that back then it was a more popular baseball game. As for basketball, well, this was the year that NBA Jam made it to consoles, a huge hit in the arcade with fantastic sounds. I went into old video game magazines, and most of them at the time seemed to prefer the Super Nintendo version, because of, well, mostly the better sound. I mean, you want to hear boom shakalaka and a clear voice. But I have to admit, the Genesis version also sounds pretty well. And when it came to graphics, Super Nintendo had, well, more colors, slightly better sprites, which is nice. But the Genesis version, I kind of actually prefer the way the basketballers look. They're better defined. Another difference is the sound on the Genesis. There's actually music in that game, and the Super Nintendo is kind of eerily quiet every once in a while. You mostly just hear sneakers squeaking. I think both versions are great, and I don't think it's worth nitpicking which one is really that much better. If you had either one of them, you would love it. So when it comes to the NBA Jam, a tie. And I would say the same thing for NBA Live 95. So this was Electronic Arts' first really good basketball game, because it played much smoother and nicer than their previous ones, the Versus Series and NBA Showdown. It also had the detail and realism of those games. So NBA Live, just like that, became the default basketball game for those who wanted to have something like a simulation. I don't think there's a big difference between the two. Some people say the Super Nintendo version looks better. I don't really agree with that. I think they both look perfectly fine. So, again, a tie for that. What about football? Well, NFL 95 was released for Sega Sports and really wasn't that much of an improvement on NFL 94. But Madden 95, I would say, took the crown again because they now removed those silly boxes for passing. So you just basically pass to a player, whoever you saw on the field. In a sense, the Super Nintendo had better passing because of more buttons, but I don't think that really made that much of a difference. Another nice improvement was that finally the Madden games had player names, so it was better as a simulation. So Madden 95 was, for many, the best game in the series, unless you preferred the way the games played in the 1992 edition. Super Nintendo also had Bill Walsh now for the college plays, and it played nicely. Probably the biggest game released this year for football was NFL Quarterback Club, which was better on the Super Nintendo. It looked and played better, and it was just a lot of fun. I mean, you scored a lot of points, but that's actually kind of nice for some people. So if you want to have a more up-tempo, arcade-like football game, NFL Quarterback Club could be your choice. And of course, there was also Tecmo Super Bowl Part 2, more or less the same as Part 1, so I won't go that much into that. But as you can see, both systems now had a broad spectrum of different football games, but the Genesis did have the NFL series, if you preferred that, and of course, the Mutant League one. Now, NFL 95 was a bit weird. It was much faster than NHL 94, which could be good, but the problem is the controls weren't that nice. A lot of people complained about that, and most people just simply stuck to NHL 94. And then we have, when it comes to soccer, a very interesting game. To most of the world, it's called Sensible Soccer, or Sensi as it is in Britain, and it's called Championship Soccer 94 in the Americas. So what about this game? Well, it's very top down, it's very little sprites, but it plays really fast, great ball physics. It also has a lot of fun options. I would say it's the most fun you can have playing soccer on the 60-bit consoles. It was already released on the Amiga. Perfect conversion for these two consoles, and they play just as great as each other. Now, if you want more realism, I have to admit the Genesis was better because you had FIFA 95, which was quite an improvement on 94. And the Super Nintendo also got this version, but oh, that frame rate again, not that good. Still a good football game as a simulation, but definitely better on the Genesis. And well, so that was all the different sports. Which one was the better of the two? Well, baseball, I would say, is a bit of a tie. Like I said, World Series baseball more realistic. Ken Griffey would be more fun. Basketball is pretty much the same. I don't think you really cared that much more about NCAA by then. Football, lots of options on both. Both played really well. I guess Mutant League Football was the main difference. And hockey, again, both stuck in NHL 94. Good on both systems. And when it came to soccer, again, lots of good options, but Genesis at least had a better version of FIFA, so I'll hand that to them. Slight advantage for the Genesis, but did it really matter that much? I don't think so. But who knows, maybe 1995 would make a big difference. Let's check those out. So 1995 was the last eventful year for the 16-bit consoles. The Genesis improved their selection with World Series Baseball 95. And it looked practically the same. It had some extra statistical options, but not much of a difference, to be honest. And Electronic Arts released their first very good baseball game, namely Triple Play 96, which played much faster than the World Series Baseball and had enough realism, but also a good mix of, arcade qualities. Nintendo, however, didn't get any new baseball games, so this only helped Genesis this year. What about basketball? Well, NBA Live 96 added a lot of roster options, but otherwise it was pretty much the same game. Both good on both systems, and NBA Jam had the tournament edition, which mostly added one added player to every team. Otherwise, it wasn't really that much different to the original NBA Jam. So, but still pretty cool. And the Super Nintendo, well, it got an interesting game called NBA Give and Go, made by Konami. It's based on the arcade game called Run and Gun. The camera perspective is really in your face, so you might not actually like it, but you might actually do. So that's something worth look into. As for football, well, the Madden series plowed on with little improvements. And there was also Electronic Arts College Football USA 96, which was a follow-up to Bill Walsh. Not yet released on the Super Nintendo, but on the Genesis, but not a big difference either. Quarterback Club 96, more of the same, to be honest. And there was the Sega football games, now called Primetime Football, with Deion Sanders instead of Joe Montana. Again, not really an improvement. There is, however, Tecmo Super Bowl 3, the final version of Tecmo Bowl, which some people kind of like because it had different graphics, different perspective, and a couple more extra play options. Going online, I noticed that most people still play the NES version from 1991, but I would say Tecmo Super Bowl 3 is the second most popular version of Tecmo Bowl. It's still being played, actually. So maybe worth looking into that. And everybody tends to gravitate towards the Super Nintendo version, although I think both versions are pretty much the same. Now, NHL 96 was a return to form for Electronic Arts when it comes to hockey. They keep the speed of the last edition, but they improved the controls. So now most hockey fans had a choice between the more tactical 1984 edition of NHL, or the more speed-up arcade version of 96. Soccer had a very interesting year. International Superstar Soccer was released for the Super Nintendo, and this might actually be the most popular sports game if you consider the whole world instead of just focusing on North America. This game was huge in Brazil and Europe, and only huge on the Super Nintendo. That was because it was released a year earlier. Later on, we'll go into 1996 and mention the Genesis version. Also in 1995, you had the deluxe edition of International Superstar Soccer, and that was even better, and you can play with 4 players, for example. It had a lot of little special moves, had great graphics, played fast, precise. It was, for many people, the perfect soccer game compared to the slow-paced and deliberate FIFA. It was a lot more fun. Speaking of which, FIFA 96 was not a good version of that game. They went even to more into simulation mode with very interesting, almost rotoscope kind of animations, which the Genesis could handle okay, but it did make the game more sluggish. The Super Nintendo version, though, I mentioned last year that it didn't have as good as a frame rate as the Genesis. I didn't think I made put enough emphasis on that. It wasn't really that bad. I mean, it was not as good, but it was quite playable, kind of like Madden 90, the Madden 93 for the Super Nintendo. I mean, not as good as Genesis, but still quite doable. FIFA 96, one released in 1995, for the Super Nintendo does not do the animation well. It's clear that the Super Nintendo cannot do all these frames of animation, and it's completely hampered. The controls also suffer. So not a good soccer game at all on the Super Nintendo. Worth considering on the Genesis, but I didn't see any improved features on the 95 version. So FIFA 95 remains the best, especially on the Genesis. But I would like to emphasize that the Super Nintendo version is doable, but not as good. Okay, so there's also Head-On Soccer, released by US Gold Games, a British company. Kind of looks like FIFA because it has the same perspective, but it's much quicker and more arcade-like, and a lot of people liked it. So another great soccer game for both systems. Okay, so that was 1995's games. Which console had the best sports games towards their end of the run? Well, I do see a clear divide in how the Genesis has better simulation games, whereas the Super Nintendo had more fun options. So kind of depending on what you preferred, that would be the better console for you. And I think that if you were really into sports, you would prefer the simulation side of things. Let's go sport by sport. Okay, so like baseball, it's still pretty much a tie. Genesis got some new simulation-like games, but both consoles had lots of options. I don't really feel like Triple Play 96 is much better than Super Batter Up, to be honest. And when it comes to basketball, well, newest editions of great games. Again, the Super Nintendo had yet another Mode 7 basketball game, which might have interested you. Other than that, they are equal. Football, so many good games. But if you're more into the college thing, again, Genesis had at least the latest roster update and the Mutant League game. And NHL, equally good. Really, just equally good on both systems. Although maybe on the Mode 7 Stanley Cup game, I don't think so. Yeah, soccer though, yes, Super Nintendo now had ISS Deluxe, the best soccer game on both systems. Maybe you would prefer Sensible Soccer, World Championship Soccer 94, because it's even more arcade-like. But this definitely gave the Super Nintendo something the Genesis didn't have. Although maybe you were one of those people who preferred FIFA 95. So altogether, I really feel like it is a tie, and it depends on what kind of games you want. Okay, so that's 1995, on to 96. Yes, 1996, the swan song year for this generation. There were, well, basically mostly updates for all the popular sports games, mostly Electronic Arts, and none of them really made a big difference. Some people consider these to be the best versions, some others. I couldn't find any clear consensus. Yeah, so only if you cared for roster updates back then. Now, Nintendo did release Ken Griffey's Winning Run, a baseball game, and it was praised for its fantastic graphics and also interesting, a very cool season mode where you can trade players and improve your team. So for some people, that's really the best baseball game on all systems for the season mode. But also a lot of people basically say, nah, the previous one from 1994, that's better. I have to admit, this Winning Run game from '96, it feels a bit cold, and it's just that makes it less of a fun time. Now, NBA Jam evolved into NBA Hang Time. This time, you could create your own player, and there were also alley-oop dunks and all that. It had a different look and sound to it, and I love the arcade version and the Nintendo 64 version. They look fine, but these 16-bit consoles do not do this game justice at all. Everything just seems a bit off. The players look stretched on the Super Nintendo. The sound on the Genesis is just bad. So, and also the Super Nintendo plays really loose. So I wouldn't advise that game. If you really were into basketball and wanted to create a player, which I did, in all fairness, I played through it, although I prefer the Nintendo 64 version. But I wouldn't recommend. I don't. Not that many people cared about it back then, and it makes sense because it just didn't look good. Okay, so there's also ISS Deluxe for the Genesis. Well, actually, not for Genesis because it was only released outside of USA. So for the Mega Drive, and most people agree that it doesn't have as good controls as the Super Nintendo version, although it does have a 5-player mode. So if you have that, maybe this would be better than the 4-player mode. But no, the truth is the Super Nintendo version has a better version of the best soccer game out there. And whether ISS Deluxe on the Genesis or Mega Drive is better than Sensible Soccer or FIFA, I think it's a bit of a three-way tie, to be honest. So that's pretty much it for 1996 when it comes to games that really mattered. Next video, we're going to tally up everything and see which console would be better for you if you were now to get into all these systems. Let's see who the definite winner is. However, I would like to declare a winner for who won during the console wars, and that is the Genesis. Yes. Even though I've said very often that both systems had plenty of good games and it wouldn't really matter, I can't deny that the Genesis had the better versions of the best games at the right time. Like I said, the NHL series was huge. The first NHL game was pretty big. Then you had NHL PA 93, which was even bigger. And those two hockey games were definitely better on the Genesis. And the same thing kind of goes for Madden. Again, you had 3 versions of Madden, if I correct countly, that were better than whatever was on the Super Nintendo. And it wasn't until the late 93 version, Madden 94, that things evened out. And that was a 2-year waiting gap. Yeah, for 2 years, you could basically say, okay, so yeah, we have NHL and Madden, and you have lesser versions. So those being the 2 most popular sports games, that really changed the playing field. If you were, I don't know, kind of like me, didn't immediately get a Super Nintendo from your parents until I got mine. Actually, I bought mine myself in late 1993, I think. By then, it really wouldn't matter. Although maybe discount prices, right? You could probably get Madden in the 92 version for $10 at FuncoLand. You couldn't do that with the Super Nintendo. So I sometimes wonder how much of an ivory tower analysis I should have of these games, because we now have, even though retro games are getting more expensive, the sports games are still very cheap. It's kind of easy to think like, oh, you have access to all the sporting games. But back then, I mean, I considered getting NBA Live 95 at the time, but it was very expensive. So I actually waited a while. I continued playing NBA Showdown while NBA Live was in the magazines. So price is a factor, I think, too. And for quite a while, you were better off having a Genesis if you wanted to play sports games. It wasn't until much later, or if you had endless money, that there wouldn't be a difference. And even then, the Super Nintendo never really surpassed the Genesis in quality. might as a try. So, and the next video, I'm gonna take a deep analysis, though, put everything next to each other. Also mention a couple of games I haven't mentioned before, like Super Baseball 2020, that might interest you, and also show some funny articles from the time where Nintendo acts like they're better at sports, things like that. So planning to see next video. Hope to see you soon in the next part of the Genesis versus Super Nintendo Console Wars Sports Edition.